Okay, so good evening. Real fast moving story today with Chelsea and the ongoing situation there with the sanctions against seven Russian nationals, including obviously Roman Abramovich. Um, we don't know what this means long term after this summer. Basically, they can't sign any new players. They can't sign any contract extensions for players. Only those who've already pre-bought their tickets for matches upcoming and season ticket holders can attend games. So you can't just turn up on the turnstiles for a home game at Chelsea and get tickets. Club shop is closed. And they're currently in discussions after being given special dispensation to continue trading as Chelsea Football Club in the Premier League and, of course, in Europe, um, in order to try and find some way uh, to, to to continue because they can't, sign any new players at Chelsea. Um, as Pilaqueta and others will be leaving as free agents in the summer, so um, it does have a knock-on impact for other clubs as well because Chelsea has players out on loan at other clubs. There are players on a loan at Chelsea. Well, the situation with Chelsea is different to Nottingham Forest and Leeds United back in the days when they've had obviously issues, but very similar to what obviously has happened at Derby in a sense, where they've basically got a transfer embargo. And they are limited in how much they can spend on match days for travel and accommodation. As such, they're limited in their away budget and they're limited on their home budget for to and from games. Um, Also, strikingly similar to what Everton could be going through as well. Everton also are under scrutiny because they've been in breach of the profit loss margin of over 135%. Their losses have exceeded 135% of profits since 2017. Plus, there is some money in Everton. There's also Russian money with an oligarch who's also been sanctioned. Um, so Everton could be also in a Derby County style situation. Now they could be docked points. Now the important thing is with the Everton situation is if the points are docked now, they're pretty much relegated. However, if the points are docked like they were with Derby at the beginning of next season, they're still a Premier League club. Um, if they dock the points now, they've had it. There's still a chance they can stay up, but their form would suggest that Burnley are playing better. And basically, it's touch and go with Everton, but there are other clubs around them also equally struggling. So it's going to come down to who can lose the least games, I think. But they're in serious trouble, serious trouble. They are really up against it. Um, right now, I think the situation is this: Chelsea are not getting docked any points. Okay, not at this stage. Um, The thing is, Usmanov also actually has some investments tied up in Arsenal, although he's not the majority shareholder, at which point he can also have investments in another club via different companies. So technically, under club ownership rules, he can invest and be a minority stakeholder in both clubs. Really weird. Um, I think it's Kroenke at Arsenal and Farsi, I think his name is at Everton, with the majority stakeholders, and Usmanov has money in both investments in both, and dividends he gets paid out as an investor. So yeah, Arsenal and Everton are linked, although Arsenal are not in the same position as Everton. Um, so again, and Bournemouth have a Russian investment as well. So it's more than just Chelsea. This has ramifications for three other clubs. Although Everton are in their own mess, similar to Derby County. Were a couple of seasons ago with Mel Morris and what's happened there. So it the whole thing is all intertwined. In regards to what actually happened to Forest and Leeds, when Nottingham Forest got relegated in 19, I think it was 98. At the beginning of the season, they had a poor start to the season, basically, historically bad start to the season by Premier League standards. But the media was saying Forest are too big to get relegated. They're too big a club to drop down to what was the old Division One, which is now the Championship. And it happened. And they haven't been back to the Premier League since 1998. So they've spent 24 years in the second and third tiers of English football, basically. Leeds, very similar story. They just ended up in administration, basically. They overspent in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they had a very, very good team at the time. Massively overspent. Got to Champions League semi-final, and then the following season they were relegated. And their best talent left en masse. They ended up in administration, points deductions, ended up in League One, much like Forest did at one point. And it's been, I think, 16 years. I think, yeah. I remember the match that actually got them relegated unofficially because they still had a possibility of staying up at the time, but they lost 3-2 to Southampton at St Mary's, and they were 3-0 down at half time. Alan Smith comes on, scores 2 goals, and gets sent off. But that was pretty much the game that relegated them. And Alan Smith got suspended. There wasn't much hope of them staying up. But even if they had stayed up, administration would have been around the corner. It would have taken a little bit longer because of the drop in finance, obviously, in the championship. But they ended up in administration. Um, Peter Risdale was the chairman at the time, who signed off on a lot of their overspend, and they ended up where they were, and it took them a long time to get back. Are things worse for Everton than Chelsea? As things currently stand, I think it's about 50-50. Obviously, Abramovich was given a time frame to sell the club, and obviously, he's already been open to selling the club for several years. This is not a new story. Um, he has said on the record that if the right bidder came along, he would happily offload the club and work out, the payback of the loan the club owed him, which was 1.5 billion. So, if the club is just taken off his hands, and there's a huge issue with the debt the club has, so yes, a buyer could come in and buy the club, but they'll be also buying 1.5 million in debts owed to Abramovich. Now, obviously, he's sanctioned. So uh, we'll see what happens. The fact that you're paying out Uzumov though of his investment in the dividend is still active involvement in the club, whether he's on the board or not. He is still making money off his investment in Arsenal. Now, whether he's pumping that straight back into Everton, so there's the link there. If you understand what I mean. While he's no longer on the board, he's getting a dividend, which basically means he's still a shareholder. If you get a dividend, you're still a shareholder. So he's obviously a minority shareholder, and you or I could sum up the cash. If, let's say I won the Euro Millions, I would quite happily buy a stake in Arsenal because they're a profit making machine. If they are a global brand, they're not as successful as they were under Wenger. But if you or I, let's say, club together on the Euro Millions, for example, win the jackpot, which I think is capped at like 180 million, I think, and we split it 90 million each, we could each buy a stake in Arsenal. Therefore, when Arsenal turn a profit at the AGM, we get a dividend. You understand? So if he's still getting paid a dividend, he may not be pumping money into the club anymore, but he still has a stake within the club, as in he is a stakeholder, a shareholder. It's like a PLC, it's like a company on the stock market. He has invested, and now he's earning the rewards of that investment 10, 15, however many years down the track after he put the money in. So yes, he is getting interest off his investment. They're paying him back out for whatever contract he signed. So I'll invest X million into the club now. For every year we finish in Europe, I get X amount percentage on top of my investment. So while he's no longer on the board and doesn't have any say with how the club is run, corporate decisions, employment decisions, restructuring of the company side of things, he's still getting paid a dividend, which means he still has shares within Arsenal. The fact he's not pumping any money into Arsenal is irrelevant because he's already bought that stake, so he's getting a payout of Arsenal's profits, and he gets a smaller dividend if they make a loss or smaller profits. That's how basically a dividend works in layman's speak. The fact he has a huge stake in Everton is the crucial thing. Plus, they breach spending cap rules and loss making rules, which means they're in breach of financial fair play. I understand you no longer benefit from him, but he benefits from that arrangement. So you initially benefited, absolutely, as he was the investor, and now you, or Arsenal as the company, let's not talk about it as a football club, as the company, have to pay a dividend on a yearly basis on your profit loss margin. So so he still was making money off the club. He put money in, so he spent money, and now he's getting his investment back bit by bit in dividends. So until his full investment's paid back, he's still going to be making money at the club. Now that transaction has now been suspended by the UK government. So that will have an impact on Arsenal. Now, whether they say, look, we're severing ties completely, um, that will be a bit more complicated on a company contractual side of things. And that's where the contractual lawyers and the finance lawyers will step in. I'm not fully aware of the exact number of in percentage wise of Everton he's investing, how much money he's invested in Everton. I know it's somewhere in the region of I think 300 to 400 million he's of his assets are tied up in Everton, and out of that, a proportion of that financial investment comes from his dividend at Arsenal. Now I don't know how much his stake was at Arsenal. I'm not an Arsenal fan, or I'm not a financial expert. To use my limited business studies knowledge from A level, all those years ago, yes, 14 years ago, to basically break down in layman's terms um, how it works. Basically, long story short, he's put money into Arsenal at some point. He's been a investor, so he's pumped money into the business. They then have to pay back his investment plus interest over a set period of time. It could be 5 years. It could be in perpetuity, basically until he dies. In perpetuity, I think is the term. Basically, he could say, until I die, and then if my investment hasn't been fully paid back by the time of my passing, it goes to my dependents or a trust or whoever inherits my companies if I sell them on, that kind of thing. From that, he's pumped money into Everton alongside his other investment portfolios. Now, he's worth, I think, 33 billion US dollars. So he's not this is chump change to him. It's also how money gets laundered, because I watched an Australian a program called Four Corners, which is the Australian version of Panorama, and they were looking at Australian football clubs, and they're like, "Well, it's the A League. It's not important." It is, because the same people, Sheikh Mansour, who owns Man City and New York FC, also owns Melbourne. Melbourne, I think it's Melbourne Glory, I think, Melbourne FC, under the same football group. And the Brisbane Roar, for example, another A-League club, there's basically an organised criminal owns them, a proper gangster who's laundered money. And the league has had to step in multiple times and go, "Mm." So there is a concern that money laundering or getting around economic sanctions against the country, football clubs and sports teams in general are seen as a good way to legitimise ill-gotten gains. Now, if you are a Russian oligarch, you're basically Russian mafia. Just very successful Russian mafia, because you also have got legitimate businesses to cover up your illegal gotten gains. That's how it works. That's what the word oligarch really means in common speak, is you're a gangster, basically. Much like the Prohibition era gangsters who had legitimate businesses. That's how Al Capone got caught. He didn't fill in his IRS form correctly on 2 Italian restaurants he owned in Chicago, and that's how they did it. And then they built the case against him for other crimes. In regards to, is Chelsea worse off? Is Everton worse off? Bournemouth could also end up in the same position, although there's been no real spotlight on Bournemouth at the moment. And obviously Arsenal as well. Even though he's no longer actively putting money into the club, he is taking money out of the club in his investments. They're paying him back, so he's still a stakeholder in a sense. He's not an active participant at board level, but he's still got a stake within that club. Just because he's no longer putting money in, he's taking money out, that's still involved in the finance of the game. Now, for me, that is troubling. Obviously, they tried to block the Newcastle takeover, but everyone turned a blind eye when the Glazers did their leveraged takeover of Man United. And that was with other people's money that they owed them. That was basically bought with debt. Not a good business model, by the way. Don't do it. Abramovich referred to over Chelsea. There was no complaints. It was seen as, investment in the game, and it's obviously benefited Chelsea massively. Obviously, it's brought a lot of investment into the English game. But there's been other takeovers as well. The Man City takeover. If we want to really go into human rights abuses, Russian money is dirty, because they limit human rights of journalists, the LGBT community, minority groups within the Russian Federation. Look at the situation in Chechnya. Basically the Chechen civil war is basically the Chechen people rose up twice, For a little while, they were sort of semi-independent, and then after Yeltsin handed over power to Putin, they basically shelled the shit out of Grozny for 6 months and displaced 1 million people, and then put their pro-Chechen leader in, who's pro-Russia, and they kicked the anti-Chechen. Well, they blew him up with a bomb. Actually, I'm not joking. They actually blew the anti-Putin leader up on a military parade. They just blew him up. Yes, I know this is where politics and economics and sport really collide. Now, there's a lot of things. I mean, I could talk about the Major League Baseball lockout, and there's economics behind that as well. Breaking it down, they earn twice as much money as the NHL, yet their players are paid 30% less on average. Let that one sink in. So that's I'm gonna let Wes, I'm gonna let that Russian Saudi money thing stand, because even though I've got moderators in the chat, and I will explain how the moderator system works for you guys, how I select moderators and who becomes a moderator, and why I set up certain live chat rules, etc. So I'm assuming you've recently subscribed, because you've got to be subscribed for a minimum period of time before you can comment. I did that to stop spam. We were getting a lot of idiots just spamming the chat, putting racist, homophobic, and other vile stuff in the chat. So I just got pissed off with it, and I helped the moderators, moderate, obviously. And as you see, Chester and Jordan have got the spanner, which means they're moderators. Basically, yes, there is an issue with PSG, Qatari money, Newcastle Saudi money, Man City, UAE, Dubai. What is interesting about these countries is they are trying to modernise, but their human rights record is still appalling nonetheless. And I always look, when I say human rights record, I say post World War II. So we're looking at 1945 onwards, especially 1990 onwards. Okay, right. God, 2018. Wes, I'm trying to picture you. I really am. I know. Where's? I'm trying to pick. I don't drink anymore, so take it up with drunk me. Sober me doesn't have a clue what's going on half the time, whatever. I know so many Arsenal fans. This is the only thing I would recognise you. I would, in the street I would recognise, and I have no idea like what drunk me has done, but sober me like understands drunk me. Take it up with him. But sober me is different. In regards to, yeah, I've had to change how the chat works, Wes. I know you don't often pop into the chat, but I have seen you leave comments on some videos, and I've seen you occasionally in the chat, but I just changed how the chat works a little bit. Give Chester and Jordan and other moderators a bit of a break, having to deal with some real vile stuff, plain and simple. In regards to PSG, well, this is what happens. You can put a team of superstars together, but if they can't gel on the field or get the job done, and it's symptomatic of the French league, basically. The French league is not competitive enough. So you've got these superstar players who at other clubs have torn it up. No doubt on that. Other clubs, they rip teams to pieces. And in more competitive leagues. The French league has been devalued massively since PSG got all their money. Monaco are a wealthy club. Their owner's worth a shed load of cash. Well, he's Russian as well, which is awkward. So Monaco are going to be affected. They're another club with Russian money. And Lille last season winning the championship, I think, was a positive for French football, but that's that their team was scavenged by other clubs. And PSG were trying to like swoop in and get off their team. So I think, yeah, the PSG situation, they can't win the Champions League. Man City can't win the Champions League. They can dominate the domestic leagues as much as they want, but in games that really matter, it doesn't. They just can't get over the line. Part of France. No energy drinks tonight. Drinking Ribena. Fruit juice. Well, cordial, basically. Part of France. Part of France used to be the home of French rugby as well as PSG, and rugby league's been played there as well with the PSG rugby league team that was around in the mid-90s, which was a failure, an expensive failure. They have modernised it from what it was originally. But in comparison to the Stade de France or the Stade Velodrome, it's a pretty soulless stadium, to be honest. It's been modernised. It's up to modern standards. It's not the oldest stadium in current use, um, but compare it to the Stade de France, which is down the road, or compare it to the rebuilt Stade Velodrome in Marseille, or Lyon's rebuilt stadium. It doesn't quite have that same. I know it's a historical stadium, and it really is, and not just PSG, but many Parisian, you know, clubs have played out that stadium, and rugby league and rugby union, and it's hosted internationals and a variety of sports. It has got history, but I don't. It doesn't set my soul on fire, if that makes sense. When I look at when you hear the atmosphere, it doesn't quite. I mean, clubs like St Etienne and Marseille, oh, the Stade Velodrome back in 1998 before it had the roof on it, when it was just four stands with no cover. It was like a flower petal, if that makes sense. The way that was shaped, because it used to be a cycling velodrome as well. Um, uh, it's some stadiums are iconic, like the new camp, the old San Manesh in Bilbao, the Mestalla in Valencia, the old one, not the new one. They haven't finished it yet. They're still trying to build it. There are some stadiums, the San Siro. I mean, San Siro. The San Nicolo in Bari, for example, which was remodernised in 1990 for the World Cup, is basically like a mini Colosseum. It's like the Roman Colosseum in Rome. Um, you know, the Puskás in Budapest. Uh, that's a stadium, that is. There are some stadiums that are modern that still make your spine tingle because the atmosphere inside. But the Parc des Princes, because I've watched so much rugby league and rugby union since I was a kid, I remember when they were building the Stade de France for the '98 World Cup. Um, I do remember when Thomas Castagnet's kicked a drop goal against England in '95. I think it was one of the last games played at the Parc des Princes in the International Rugby Union, and this is before it got upgraded. And the stadium's going bananas. It's creaking, but they're going bananas. But at the moment, the Parc des Princes ranks lower than the Stade de France. Firstly, the capacity is less, and secondly, it's lost importance to the Stade de France and the Stade Velodrome in Marseille, and Lyon's rebuilt stadium. It's lost a little bit of importance over the last 24, 25 years in where it was as the national stadium to the secondary national stadium. Why did the Azteca? It's the way they laid the turf. It's at altitude. It's basically in the middle of a high altitude desert in the Sierra Nevadas in Mexico. So the pitch just did. I mean, if you look at the 1970 World Cup, the pitch surface is different, and they had issues trying to keep it as green as possible because there's often lack of rainfall at that time of year in Mexico. You're at altitude. There's a lot of pollution in Mexico City as well, um, and it's very very arid and dry at that time of year. You don't get those Pacific and Atlantic hurricanes coming in till October, till you know February March time. So it's in the dry season at altitude. You know, basically in a bulk. Mexico City is a dried up lake bed where Tenochtitlan used to be, the old Aztec. That's what's called the Azteca, the old Aztec civilization. It's basically a dried up lake bed. It's in a bulk surrounded by mountains. So it's basically an oven. Think of it like an oven. And that affects how the grass grows, basically. Also, they had like the stadium roof, the shadows create an effect on the pitch. Um, and it's the way they laid the turf as well. But it's a fantastic stadium. It's a cathedral. It's one of the greatest stadiums in world football, um, hosting two World Cup finals. Just make iterate that two. Um, much like the Maracanã in Rio has hosted two. It's one of the few stadiums to host multiple World Cup finals. Um, and it's obviously going to host World Cup games in 4 years' time when Mexico co-hosts with the US and Canada. It's an amazing stadium. Absolutely amazing stadium, so historical, so important for the history of the game from 1970, 1986, and in 4 years' time, more history we made on that surface. The interesting thing about the Azteca and Guadalajara, which is the next city down from Mexico City, part of the massive mega city, um, and Guadalajara is very similar to the Azteca, built by the same people actually. Again, similar altitude. Again, Guadalajara as a city sit in a similar kind of geological situation to Mexico City, in the sense that again, dried up lake bed, part of like an old volcanic lake bed kind of thing, bowl of a city surrounded by mountains that links into the bowl of a city that is Mexico City. Hot, arid altitude, and that does affect how the grass grows. It does affect the air temperature. There's a lot of pollution in Mexico. It's not the air pollution is pretty bad in Mexico at times. Um, and yeah, you've got to remember altitude in the height of summer. Watch the 1970 World Cup semi-final between what was then West Germany, so Germany and Italy, um, in Guadalajara. They're out on their feet. The England Brazil game, they're out on their feet. In the group stage. Um, uh, Brazil France in the quarterfinal, and then France West Germany in the semi-final. They are out on their feet. Belgium versus Argentina. Literally, the players are out on their feet. Doesn't matter how fit you are. Altitude playing destroys you. And in the last 30 or so years, a lot of effort's been put in by where my cousins live in Italy. They are at a similar altitude to some of the lower mountainous regions in Mexico, or similar altitude, the Alps. And a lot of the Serie A teams do their altitude training there. The two professional Italian rugby union teams and the national side do their altitude training there. And it prepares them for, especially the Italian teams in Treviso and Zebra, when they're playing the South African teams on the high veld in Bloemfontein or Pretoria or Joburg, which is again a similar altitude. And at this time of year, when you're playing over in South Africa, you're technically playing at the end of their summer. So again, you're at a certain altitude, and when you're on a high plateau or an area that's like a plateau, sort of surrounded by mountains, and you're quite high up, and it's quite dry and arid, the heat just kills you dead. Um, do I think Chelsea finished? The situation is serious with Chelsea. Club officials are currently talking to the government to find a way whether Abramovich can just sign the club over to the fans for nothing, and then a fans trust can then sell the club on for fan owners group. So there are some fan groups that want to basically have the club signed over to them, and then a buyer can come in. The problem with that is the debt won't be written off because he has to sign over all assets and all debts. He cannot, and so therefore, because his assets are frozen, you've still got that debt there that has to be serviced at some point. Now, that's the problem. That's 1.5 billion. That would then put them in the situation of breaching financial fair play rules and other things, and it will have to be serviced at some point. That could lead to points deductions. But that's an issue for next season and beyond. Right now, they can complete the season as is. There's not many weeks left, so they can get through till May or June, depending on how far they make it in the Champions League and FA Cup. They can get through, and we'll see what happens. Arsenal are not the third best team, by the way, in the history of English football. Just going to put that out there. Just going to put that out there. But in the Chelsea situation, that's sort of where things are at. I believe FIFA have a YouTube channel, so you might be able to catch it on a FIFA YouTube channel, or someone who's just put in 1970 or 1986 World Cup full match replay, and there'll be games. Even if they're just group stage games, you can see the effect, the heat and altitude, especially Guadalajara and the Azteca in Mexico City, how that impacts the play, and how defenders are struggling, and even attacking players they're barely running. They're out on their feet. I reckon Possibly one of the best games I've ever seen would have been England-Brazil in 1970 in the group stage. The semi-final between West Germany and Italy, which ultimately cost the Italians the World Cup. I think the amount of effort and exertion they put into that game, going 120 minutes, damn near killed them. And yeah, so and then you've got the two semi-finals in '86. And then obviously both finals as well. You can physically see how exhausted the players are. Even the winning side looking shattered. And they control Brazil. Even the Brazil side of 1970 are dead on their feet when it's 4-1. So, Liverpool, Man United, Arsenal, who gets fourth spot? I think take the money side out of it. I mean, who deserves fourth spot in the Premier League? It's going to be a toss up between Arsenal and West Ham. Arsenal, West Ham is what that's going to come down to. And Arsenal out of Europe and West Ham are still in Europe, so that could have an impact. Both clubs are out of the FA Cup. So with West Ham, having to play more games than Arsenal now, I'll say that's advantage Arsenal, but then West Ham could possibly get that shot in the arm of, a bit of extra confidence and momentum if they do well in Europe. So that one is going to go down. I think Wolves as well. Wolves could be a dark horse. That could really be the cat amongst the pigeons. Then don't forget that Tottenham, while they're all over the place, can get a string of 3 or 4 games together. They can get in the mix. But we'll just have to see what honestly happens there. And also what happens with Chelsea, because if there are points deductions and then other issues, watch the space there. At the other end of the table, I think Norwich are done. Their defensive records for and against is shocking. They managed to get some wins together. I think Watford are done. Roy Hodgson, I don't know why he came out retiring. He should just stay retired because that's going to damage his reputation with what he did at Palace and Fulham, and to a certain extent Liverpool and Blackburn and Inter Milan. And so I think what we've done, Burnley, I think, can get out of it. And then you've got Leeds and Everton just above them. And the rest of the league is clear. So there's the bottom 5. And I think Everton are in a right tailspin. So I'd say. Yeah, Man United have got issues with the Glazers with their leverage takeover. Liverpool under Gillette and Hicks, who were then convicted of fraud, by the way, had their own issues. And the Fenway Sports Group has sort of salvaged that situation because, quite honestly, Liverpool could be in the same situation as Everton right now if they don't have the current ownership. Arsenal, the stadium rebuild, they spent that long making sure that the stadium was paid off and they were on a sound financial footing, that it has obviously impacted where they are today. And this is what Tottenham could find out, is they could be a poor man's Arsenal because they still haven't paid off that stadium. While Arsenal are now stadium free of paying it off because they spent so long making sure they were on a stable financial footing, not overly overspending in the transfer market. Recruitment has been an Arsenal problem, and there are question marks over the ownership, absolutely. But yeah, everyone's had, but I think there's a fair bit of dodgy money in not just English football, but football in general, and to a certain extent, other sports as well. Other sports are starting to shift the same way, which is troubling for me. It seems like we've learned nothing from the last 30 years in European football. Greek football's a mess, for example. No, Fenway Sports Group are actually a very good ownership group. They have obviously the Boston Red Sox. They've now just bought the Pittsburgh Penguins, or majority stakeholders there, and obviously Liverpool. And the 3 sports teams they own are all highly successful sports teams in their respective leagues and sports that they play in, and are regular contenders for the title every season now, and winning stuff. So. The interesting thing with Fenway Sports Group is the Major League Baseball lockout, and I can discuss that a bit later on. You wonder if Everton Stadium will be built. The planning permission behind it has actually caused a corruption scandal within Liverpool City Council. There is a current investigation, and high level local government officials have been arrested and charged for fraud and corruption and bribery, and that is linked into this proposed stadium move to the docks, which has got the go ahead. So Goodison Park, if everything goes well, will have 2 or 3 seasons left before Everton move out. So we'll have to see what happens with Goodison. I hope they stay. Um, Much like Anfield, they could have done a lot more in situ with Goodison, and Bill Kenwright even wanted to move the club like 20 years ago. So there's been this sort of behind the scenes rumbles to get out of Goodison, which I think is not the right idea. And because of this stadium plan, the UNESCO World Heritage status for the Liverpool Docks has been withdrawn last year. So there is a backlash. I'm not sure everyone is actually happy with. Doesn't matter who you support in Liverpool, because you've also got Tranmere across the Mersey as well. In Birkenhead, um, the other Merseyside club, and you've got Stockport County nearby, and you've got other clubs that come under the Liverpool catchment area where there is a concern from Merseysiders. So you don't have to be an Everton fan about losing the history of Goodison and what it means to the community in the Anfield Road area and Stanley Park and all that, and the importance that those two stadiums have, and the ongoing political scandal within City Hall in Liverpool, because it has actually been a big scandal. Um, and it's not really making the headlines like it should, but it's actually heads of roll. There's a criminal investigation, there's a fraud investigation, it concerns about money laundering and backhanders, and it is linked to the stadium development and the doctrines development in Liverpool. Um, yeah, there's the this is all linked in, the overdevelopment and the losing the UNESCO World Heritage status, which is actually affecting investment. If you get that kind of status, you actually get like special funds released to your area, which could have been spent on social housing, social projects in the poor areas of Merseyside, in the deprived areas of the city, um, infrastructure projects to improve connectivity around the city, because Liverpool's got a metro system, actually has an underground system. It does, it's a metro. And things like that, so public transport, um, you know, infrastructure projects linked to that, encouraging people, especially young people, to stay away from crime and youth projects. You get that with UNESCO World Heritage. You lose that, you actually lose some special funding as well. So there's a knock-on impact. There is ongoing scandal at City Hall, and the planning department under investigation for some very, very suspicious dealings, including the granting of the stadium planning permission to go ahead and break ground within the next year or so, I believe. So that does actually have ramifications, because whether it gets built or not, it's been given the go ahead, and there's obviously plans to move Everton out of Goodison into whatever they call the stadium at some point. But I guess looking at it right now, Everton are very likely to get relegated, and their owner they're in trouble. And they could. What's the point of having a 60,000 seat stadium in, let's say, League Two? It could happen. Look what's happened to Oldham. Look what happened to Swindon. Leeds, Bradford City. There's loads of ex-Premier League clubs or current Premier League clubs that at some point have been as low as League Two. So yes, the situation with Everton is just as serious as the situation at Chelsea. Just different style of situation. But the seriousness is cannot be understated, quite frankly. And it's readily apparent to me that um, the, what they call the director's test, or the fit and proper persons test, is another example of it not being fit for purpose. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for Chelsea fans at this point. I know a lot of Chelsea fans, and my sympathy starts running thin for the club. there's always been a suspicion with overseas money is like even with domestic money as well. There's some dodgy British owners who have also the Oyster family, Black, for example, who've been equally as dodgy, if not more so. But yeah, I've always had a question mark about certain clubs and where the money's come from, and now no. I mean, to be a Russian oligarch, you basically got to be an organised criminal, basically. Um, at some point, you don't get to being an oligarch in Russia without getting your hands dirty at some point, and doing dodgy things. It's a fact. Um, in regards to you know where football has turned a blind eye for many years to you know um, dirty money. It has. There's been a long time of football just money's coming in. They're not questioning where it comes from, and that is starting to have an impact now. And there's going to come a point where fans want greater control. We know that. We want the 50+1 rule as a set rule. Um, the last couple of years have taught us that we are more important to them than they think, than claimed we were. And if the FA and the Premier League and Football League are to properly enforce what they're doing against Everton, that's 60 to 70% of clubs would be technically in breach of the losses over profit of 135%. The whole of the Championship and Premier League, like that, at some point would have breached that rule in some way. Um, uh, and yes, same with the fit and proper person. That's three quarters. That's 75% of the Football League. If we're looking at the losses over profit margin of over 135%, that's around 60 clubs. So that's around two thirds. So the various ownership and financial rules that UEFA have imposed upon all the leagues in Europe, not just English football, but Scottish football as well, with what happened with Rangers and Gretna and Dunfermline and Livingston and Inverness, Caithness, and a host of clubs up there as well. UEFA have come up with a set of rules saying this is what we want you to abide by, and each league is allowed to have a bit of leeway with what kind of rules they put in place for directors' tests and the finances, and state involvement, for example, and a whole host of other things. And if they were properly enforcing them for the entire time that these rules have been in existence, there will be less money in the game, which is not necessarily a bad thing, or less money, clubs being worth less, but the TV rights still being worth a stupid amount of money, but the clubs actually being worth less money, if that makes sense. And the game probably would be better run because the clubs would actually be making massive profits. But at the same time, they wouldn't have these unsustainable debts. So the sport would actually start paying for itself. Whereas what we've seen since 1992 is overspend by a lot of clubs, so Leeds United, for example, which was an earlier question. And, we wouldn't have a situation like Derby County in the situation there and Reading, for example, in the Championship. What Everton could be facing, what Chelsea are currently embroiled with. Um, if we had a stringent directors test, I would think several countries would be on the no investor list. You can't invest from these countries. Bye bye. And the financial fair play rules and everything like that. The game would still have these massive TV deals. There's no doubt in my mind that TV deals would still be worth stupid money. But then the game would pay for itself. The sport would actually be self-sustaining without needing chronic debt. The players would still be paid massive money. I have no doubt on that. The transfers would still, records would be broken every year. Maybe not on the Neymar or Mbappe levels, or even Harry Maguire or some of these big Van Dijk kind of spending. However, there would still be multi-million transfer deals. Ronaldinho levels like that, 32 to 36 million, I think would be the record, in my opinion. Something like that would be acceptable. The wages would still be about a good 50k a week, which is actually less than what Mbappe is asking by 800,000 a week. He's asking for 850,000 a week. I'm not joking. Um, well, that's what he's being offered to stay at PSG, and I'm not joking on that. He wants maybe a million. I think €1 million or £1 million is almost the exchange rate is hardly anything in it at the moment. So think of that, 1 million a week. Just think of that. That's more than the base salary for a Major League Baseball player by double. Just put that in perspective. So the salaries will still be pretty good, and I don't think you would have the complaint of these guys are getting overpaid now because the debt's taken out, dodgy ownership's taken out, the TV deal's still worth a lot of money, and I would reckon that the ticket prices would be more sustainable for the average fan. That's my opinion. If the rules are properly enforced, I think it benefits everyone. The rules have not been properly enforced, and football has not cared where the money's come from for 30 years. So we've ended up basically where we didn't want to be 30 years ago when they reformatted the European Cup to the Champions League. The TV money increased, the sponsorship increased, and the product we've got, I believe, is a lesser product anyway. But the sport's on its knees. The sport has got bloated financially, and what we've seen, I'm going to say over the last decade, actually, would be a fair assessment, is what we're seeing now. The process has been sped up, and there's been industry experts who say an industry overheats. So they get these experts in who, not just football, but who study not just sport in general. I think economies and how they can overheat, and then you have a property bubble bursts, or a certain industry overheats, and then that commodity becomes worthless because there's a over speculation on a commodity. They've been going for years that this speculation, this debt in the game, is unsustainable. The industry is not self-sustaining; it always needs new money constantly pumping in because there's too much debt. It has to service the debt. This is an industry built upon debt. It's not built upon profits anymore. It's now on who can control their debts the best. And the economic experts have been saying the money bubble's got to burst. The debt is going to become unsustainable. Now, COVID, I think, has somewhat sped that up. The fact that only one club since the start of the pandemic has gone out of business in Macclesfield astounds me, quite honestly. Only one football team. And this is the economy experts. These are experts who look at various industries that have had a crash, like the housing market or the stock market crashes we've seen, and certain industries being badly run. They are actually shocked that football hasn't collapsed yet or gone through a crash. And the money bubble, they've been saying it's got to burst, it's got to burst, it's got to burst. And at some point it will. The debt will become too much to service. It will become unsustainable. I think the process has been sped up. And the reason why we're in the situation is going back to the fit and proper persons test, the losses exceeding revenues by 135%. So for every pound you make, the debt's £1.35. So for every pound you make, you've got to spend 135 pennies. So for every pound, it's £1.35p. You take £1, but you lose £1.35. So you make a quid, but you give back an extra 35p. That's the rule. So if it's more than that, you're giving back like pound, £1.50. Yeah, you can't do that. And so many clubs are at fault of that, and that is a problem. I think in English football, I think one club has no debt whatsoever and hasn't had debt for 15 years, and that's Exeter City. Because the fans have a say in how the club's run. They have a majority stake. I'm not making it up. They are a model club. Even the German clubs in the Bundesliga look at Exeter City and go, that is a perfect model. Let's try and get as close to that as possible. The fact that Bayern Munich is the only club in the European top leagues to make a profit last year. One club in 5 leagues made a profit last year. So we're talking about the big 5. One. Let that sink in. Out of 98 clubs, 1 made a profit. Year before, 2 made a profit. Chelsea was the other one. So just over 1% of clubs in Europe, if you could take Bayern Munich as an example, made a profit last year. That's not good. That tells you there's a problem. And if the German system is the best system for club finances and ownership, and only one of their clubs is making a profit, that is a problem. 40k a week will snap a hand off. That's why you can't understand about players not getting enough money. Their careers are notoriously short, so you want to make as much money as you possibly can while you're at your peak. So I understand that. But the wage inflation is ridiculous, absolutely. What's the toughest position to play in football? I'm going to full back, wing back, left back, right back, kind of. You've got to be defensive minded, but also I would say goalkeeper, because you're the last line of defence. And if it goes horribly wrong, the spotlight's on you. I think, as an ex-goalkeeper myself, I'm going to say that's the worst position to play. Maybe not the toughest, but it's the worst. Mentally, the worst, because you could play brilliantly for 9 games, and on that 10th game, you make that one mistake, you lose 1-0, and that's either the difference between promotion, relegation, winning a trophy, losing a trophy, and then spotlights on you. I wouldn't say fullbacks necessarily. It depends on the system and how it's been played, and what you're. Because most players now are interchangeable in positions; they can cover more than one area of the field. I would say goalkeeper, because that is the only position that's basically set in stone. All the others, there's a lot of interchangeable parts. A guy can be a centre back, can also be a defensive midfielder or a sweeper. A right back can be a right centre back or a right wing back. So they play multiple roles, and it can be pretty adaptable. Whereas a goalkeeper is a goalkeeper, and there's a lot more pressure on goalkeepers. It's the same in ice hockey. It's the same in Gaelic football. It's the same in lacrosse. I would say a goalkeeper. It's a very specialist position, but it's the one with the most pressure, in my opinion. And that's just personal opinion. I think everyone can have their opinion, especially if you've played a certain sport. So if we're talking about fullbacks in rugby league and rugby union, that is also a specialist position, but it's not the toughest. Yeah, I think they have the position that have the most impact on the game outside of the scrum halves, fly half, kind of like the creative players. Some of the runs they make and the defensive contributions. Would you rather be a goalkeeper, ice hockey goalkeeper, or wicket keeper? Well, I was a field hockey goalie, I was a football goalie, and I was a wicket keeper at times. So I've had the gloves, basically. I would say wicketkeeper and hockey goaltender are possibly scarier. You've got to have a screw loose to do them, absolutely, because you're getting hit. You could get hit in the head at 90 to 100 and something mile an hour. The fastest ball in cricket, I think, was bowled at 100. I'm going to say 105 mile an hour or something like that. And the hardest slap shot in ice hockey has been recorded at 135 miles an hour. I've seen helmets break in game. I've seen a hockey goalie take a puck, to the head, his hair and his the grill nearly take his eye out. Right? So I've seen and break, and he actually had a broken eye socket from the force. I've seen a batsman at least in cricket get hit full in the face and his teeth fly out. So um, I would say they are you've got to be completely unhinged. And they do say that the goalies are a bit not quite right. Ilya Brizgalov is possibly the best example of an ice hockey goalie who's completely deranged. Brizgalov is just a character, and if you don't know who Ilya Brizgalov is, check him out on YouTube. Some of his stuff, he comes out with some uh, bananas comments. Um, I've got a set of their 6 ounces hockey pucks. 6 ounces. I've got a load of them. I use them as paperweights actually, but they even just holding them in your hand and just tapping yourself on the leg or the knee, they hurt. They're solid. They're vulcanized rubber. They are solid. They hurt a lot. yeah. Um, yeah, wicket keepers, anyone in that kind of position where like you're a goalkeeper or a wicket keeper, you are going to get a lot more scrutiny because it's a very specialist position in your sport. Very specialist. Your job as a wicket is to catch everything. Um, it's it is a very specialist position. Um, so when you do make those little errors or those little drop catches rather than a catch, or you miss, you don't stop the ball going to the boundary, or you don't fully control a rebound in the goalie sense, be it in those sports that require a goalie like lacrosse, field hockey, ice hockey, Gaelic football, and association football. You do get criticised about your rebound control, such because it's such a specialist position, such an important position. Um, but for some reason, the rest of your team avoids blame. Well, if you're facing a firing squad every night or every game, you're facing above average shots for your sport or your league that season. Of course, you're going to concede more goals on average, unless you are just athletically just elastic. Um, oh yeah, no. Well, it depends on the situation. If it's a rear guard action and you pulled off like Tim Howard in the 2014 World Cup set a record for international knockout football or something for the amount of saves he made in that game. Double, it was almost 20 saves. He conceded 2 goals, but it was a 2-all draw, I believe, in a group stage game, and he pulled off save after save after save. So he was remembered for the amount of saves he made, not the goals he conceded. Um, Peter Schmeichel, Champions League final, and Oliver Kahn are not remembered for anything they really did. It was 3 goals. They pulled off some really good saves in that game. Gordon Banks against Brazil in 1970. They lose the game 1-0, but he's remembered for more of the save rather than Jairzinho's goal that went through him. He was just beaten for the pace. And he was the best goalie in the world at the time. And pulls off possibly the greatest save of all time, especially at international level. But then Ochoa from Mexico in the last couple of World Cups has pulled off some ridiculous saves. And Mexico haven't progressed further than the second round, but Ochoa's, possibly some of the greatest saves of the modern era. And he's a bit of an internet sensation. And then you've got Rene Higuita with the scorpion kick, and Kasper Schmeichel last year in the FA Cup final. There was those iconic moments. But then I remember Manuel Almunia, Champions League 2006. Francesco Toldo in the Euros final in 2000. Brilliant all tournament. Split second where he doesn't quite get enough of a wrist on it. He gets his hand on it, but his wrist he's tired. He's lunged to his left. And his wrist isn't strong enough. He's remembered for that, not for what he did in the whole tournament, where he's been pulling off penalty saves and saves from free kicks and volleys, and he's been amazing in that few seconds in the final against France. And it just creeps under his glove because he hasn't quite got a strong enough hand to it. right at the death, and his head's in his hands. And the only reason he was playing in that tournament was Buffon had broken his hand when he was, I think, was he still at Parma? I think he was still at Parma. He hadn't quite. I don't think he'd gone to Juventus at that point, and Buffon had broken his hand, but the tournament couldn't play. Yeah, it's like Zaccardo, the Italy right back in the 2006 World Cup, scored that own goal where he shanked it into his own net. Didn't play in the rest of the tournament. Zambrotta played in his place. So it's one of them. You get remembered for those. Sometimes that moment can cost you your place in the team for a run of games, or it just happens. Del Piero and Fabio Grosso in the semi-final against Germany. You know, it happens. Um, so, but there are some ridiculous goalkeepers out there, and every goalkeeper has a bad game every now and then. It happens. You cannot. I remember, it was Al Montoya for the Montreal Canadiens. He let in 10 goals in against Columbus Blue Jackets about 5 or 6 years ago. And he's waving his stick and they're going, "Get me out of here." And the coach just left him in to get slaughtered. And he pulled off about 40 saves in that game. He concedes 10 goals, so his save percentage was destroyed. But no one remembers the 40 saves he had to pull off because the team, he was facing a firing squad. The team stopped playing in front of him and he was just, it ruined his career. Um, Yes, Iker Casillas. I remember Iker Casillas in the Champions League where Real Madrid were getting, I think it was a 5-1 defeat in the game they were playing. And the commentator said if it wasn't for Iker Casillas, it could be 10 to 15 goals that have gone in. Because the backup goalie hadn't played a lot of games that was on the bench for that game that had been named. And I think Yahtzee Dudek was in the Real Madrid squad at the time, but was injured. So their replacement goalkeeper was like 18, 19, or an academy player and hadn't played at that level before. And Casillas was facing the firing squad. And the commentators were like, "Yeah, if he's not in goal, and they've got this teenager in goal, they've had it." Because A, we don't know how good this teenager is going to be, and B, Casillas is keeping the scoreline respectable. And it was just, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But Van der Sar from Man United against Liverpool, I think Liverpool beat them 5-1 in a game. Even De Sena, that's one of the best goalkeepers of all time, in my opinion, of the modern era, at least. And he's had 5 goals hammered past him. It happens. But it's when you are facing a firing squad, you're not going to keep if sometimes a goalie can steal you a draw or a win. And steal you a game by standing on their head. And that you can't expect a guy to do that constantly because that leads to severe mental fatigue. Not physical, it's mental fatigue, where eventually you reach a breaking point and it the pressure will get to a player. And Jordan Pickford played exceptionally well in the Euros, and he was let down by the players in front of him. Jordan Pickford played exceptionally well the last 2 tournaments for England, and he has been let down by the rest of the team. Pickford, and while as a shot stopper, I've got no doubt on Pickford. When the crosses are coming in and positioning in the box, I'm not sold on him. But as a shot stopper, he's a very good player, and I can see Everton being forced to sell him this summer. I don't think he's going to stay at Everton. I think he's going to go somewhere else, be it in Europe or England. He's not going to stay at Everton because I think they won't be able to afford to keep him. They're going to have to recoup some of their losses. So I can see Jordan Pickford being on the move in June. But yeah, even the great Iker Casillas has had some shocking games. And when I say shocking games, he's conceded goals, but if it wasn't for Iker Casillas, Real Madrid are losing by more. That's fact. Dida for AC Milan back in the day, Buffon. They've all had their off nights and they've also conceded goals, but if it wasn't for them, the scoreline's looking more ridiculous. Yeah, that's a goalkeeper who goes on a run. Basically, he's on a run of form and he's hot. His eye is in. He's playing out of his skin. This season he hasn't. His form has dropped. The team in front of him isn't playing well, and you can see that mental fatigue is you can't keep it up forever. Now that's the downside to being a goalie is the mental toll it takes on this. There's only so long you can play out your skin, basically. He did, but there's also the downside of when you come off that. Well, we don't know what the other goalies would have done. I think I think since we had Gordon Banks, very dominant, then Peter Shilton, then David Seaman, we've had three very dominant goalkeepers for a very, very long time. And since David Seaman, we had a bit of Nigel Martin, and he was alongside Seaman and Tim Flowers in the 90s and the early 2000s. They were the three dominant goalkeepers on an England standpoint. It's about 2000. Well, Tim Flowers retired by that point, but Nigel Martin and David Seaman were still going in the early 2000s. They were your dominant goalkeepers, and David Seaman was the dominant one, and Nigel Martin and Tim Flowers were the secondary backups. And they were very, very competent and also pretty good. Out of the three, Nigel Martin was the one who didn't win any silverware, but that is another story for another day. I'm saying that. So we've had a history of having some dominant goalkeepers for a very, very long time, and then Seaman retires, and that's the problem. The follow up to David Seaman, we haven't had a generational talent of a goalkeeper. That's the problem. David James gave it a fair crack. I'm gonna say now, David James did give it a fair crack. And on his day, he was one of the best goalkeepers in the world. However, he was too inconsistent. David James, over his entire career, solid. Not as good as David Seaman, not as good as Peter Shilton, not as good as Gordon Banks. Then we had Paul Robinson, pretty solid goalkeeper. Not going to lie, Paul Robinson. Leeds, Tottenham, Blackburn, very, very solid. And he had health issues forced his retirement. He had blood clots in his lung. So that forced his retirement was health issues rather than just going, I'm retiring because my body can't do it anymore. And in the sense of I've had a long career, we'll call it a day. Now, his body sort of gave up on him health wise rather than injuries. It was his health that did for him. Ben Foster's still around playing. You've got Pope and Heaton had injuries. Joe Hart's form just fell off a cliff very, very quickly. He peaked very early and form just went. Whereas Kasper Schmeichel, who's his contemporary at City and going out on loan at other clubs, has kept that form. Joe Hart's form is gone. And they're about the same age. So Joe Hart peaked a lot earlier and was at his peak for a shorter period, whereas Kasper Schmeichel, I think, still got, no, I would say no, Joe Hart was good, but he followed on after Peter Schmeichel and David Seaman as well, ironically, and some other goalkeepers played for City to various levels. He weren't dominant in that position, but Joe Hart, he had a very purple patch for a couple of years. He wasn't consistent enough before or after. That's the problem. Carlo Nash was an underrated goalkeeper for Man City, who recently retired a couple of years ago. But in my opinion, Joe Hart had a very small purple patch, and he peaked very early in his career. Where most goalkeepers tend to peak in their mid-30s, he peaked in his mid-20s, which is not good for a goalkeeper, peaking that early and burning out so quick. Don't know what went wrong with Joe Hart, but his form he's just not what he was. You got Henderson. He obviously was at Sheffield United in that Man United system. Heaton and Pope. Good. You've got Fraser Forster, Ben Foster. We've now got a lot of goalkeepers to choose from all at the same time. The problem is they're not dominant. They're not dominant, and that's the problem. That's where I think they're all talented. For whatever reason, Southgate keeps going for Pickford, but he's not commanding in the box. Shot stopping, yes, but commanding his area, claiming crosses, organising his defence, no. Shot stopping, yes, but otherwise, no. I'm not sold on Pickford as an all-round keeper. He is actually a poor man's Iker Casillas. Iker Casillas also had issues with the cross and dominating his box at times. He could be a bit flappy, but as a shot stopper, my God, the guy could keep the ball out the net. It was the mistakes he made. He is, by modern standards, he is, yes. Little T-Rex arms. He's not the tallest, man. He's very athletic, though. He does cover his ground very, very well, but he's not the biggest man. Whereas Fraser Forster's a giant. Pantilimon, remember him, the Romanian international goalkeeper who played for Man City? He's 6'10". Jordan Pickford's 5'10", maybe 6 foot. So he's on the slightly smaller side. Yeah, he's not the biggest goalkeeper. But on saying that, he is a good shot stopper. There are defects in his game that he's good. He's not world class. Not yet, anyway. Not yet, anyway. He's like Peter Bonetti, the Panther. Ex Chelsea, obviously part of Chelsea, great. Yeah, Ajax are known for having international goalkeepers come through their system. So for Holland and other countries, absolutely. If he can get a run in the Ajax team or any other team, and yeah, he can be good, but he's very, very young, and you've got to be very, very careful not rushing goalkeeper development. They tend to peak and develop at a different rate to other players. They get better with age, not worse. Generally, look at Buffon, look at Toldo, look at Carlo Cudicini was a smaller goalkeeper as well. He was very, very good. Had a very long, distinguished career at Chelsea. So there are some really, really good goalies out there who are, and have been, who are on the smaller side. Ochoa for Mexico, he's a smaller goalie, very flexible, very athletic, makes up for his lack of height with his athleticism. Possibly. I think he's not long for Everton, let's just say that. If Everton get relegated or have a point deduction, he's out. He's gone. He wants to be England's number one. You can't be England's number one playing in the Championship. That just can't happen. So if he wants to remain international, I think he has to play top flight football in Europe or in the Premier League. So if Everton, it comes to pass that they are docked points, and they have to get their spending under control, I think Pickford's on the way out. In order for Everton to lower their debt and control their spending, I think Pickford would ultimately not be an Everton player much longer. But how he fits into another club, I don't know. But he has to work on the issues within his game, which he is error prone. But at the moment, he is England's number one. When he puts on an England shirt, he plays better than club level, in my opinion. But he's still got a lot of deficiencies in his game, which he can work on. But he's a smaller goalie. He is very athletic, but he's got a rash temperament, and when he makes errors, they are catastrophic. And under the high ball, the cross, he's not commanding in the box. And that is a problem. And there are some good goalies playing in League One and the Championship who could play at a high level. And there are some other good English goalkeepers in Europe and the top flight who I think are more rounded. Less flashy, but more rounded. So I think England are going to have a goalkeeping dilemma come the World Cup. I generally do. Because if Pickford stays at Everton, they get relegated. Southgate's got a decision to make. Pick a Championship goalie or go with another Premier League goalie. And that's the problem. I'm not sure West Ham do. If I'm being honest, I'm not sure West Ham do. Um, and Kelleher for Liverpool is a good solid number 2. So Liverpool don't need a replacement in their ranks if Alisson goes down injured, because Kelleher's proven that he's a class operator himself with some of the performances he's put in for Liverpool when he's been called upon. You know, Chelsea have got Edouard Mendy and Kepa, although Edouard Mendy is the better goalie by a country mile. I don't know. Is the honest opinion on that one. And because Chelsea can't sign any new players, Chelsea are obviously taken out. Man United, De Gea is still there, but some days he's brilliant, some days he's awful. I couldn't tell you. Being honest, I think I can't think of a Premier League club that right now needs a new goalkeeper. I think that's a problem. So it'll be interesting to see what actually happens to Jordan Pickford if Everton get relegated. Because if they do, I can't see Everton bouncing straight back up. Not with the financial issues they have off the field, and with the rule breaches they've had. I just can't see it happening. And with their form over the last 18 months, can't see it. Cannot see it. So I don't know. I don't know what Everton do. I don't know what Pickford does. It'll be interesting. It will be interesting, but he could end up in a European club. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But I think it does pose a headache for England going into the World Cup. The club situations at a couple of clubs in the top flight does pose problems, and there's good Championship and League One goalies who could and should be playing in the Premier League as well. So I think the competition for that position has gone up rather than down. And I think with the situation Everton find themselves in, it'll be interesting to see if the club does pick up Pickford and say, you're now our starting goalkeeper. Because I think every club is pretty settled with their number 1 and number 2. I mean, you've got Dubravka and Darlow at Newcastle. Darlow's English. He's had a run as a star, number 1, and as the number 2. Dubravka's an international for Slovakia. There's not a place for him at Newcastle. I can't see a place for him at any other club right now, unless let's say there's a long-term injury to someone, or a goalkeeper decides, I'm going to retire now. I can't see a place for him. Well, if Middlesbrough get promoted, he might end up there. Nottingham Forest get promoted. There's a possibility, but I think they're happy with the goalkeepers they've got at Forest. Blackburn with Kaminsky. I can't see him unseating Kaminsky if we get promoted. I think they're quite happy with Kaminsky in goal, and he's had some very good performances over the last couple of years. I mean, he was the player of the season last year. And so I don't know. Quite honestly, I don't know what Championship or Premier League club would be willing to spend the money if they're settled. That's the problem. Unless one of the promoted clubs decides to sign him next year, and then therein lies the problem. Is Bournemouth have got Begovic? He's an international level goalkeeper. Fulham, they've got some good young goalkeepers, and look at their defensive record. You've got Huddersfield; they're having a really good season. So that narrows his options for the promotion race out the Championship, and in the Premier League, it's a tough one. It is a tough one. Um, Maybe Man United do sell De Gea because he has hinted he wants to go back to Spain. I don't know. Possibly Villa. But I think they're pretty. I think Gerrard's pretty happy with um, the goalkeepers he's got there. In the transfer window, they didn't make a move for a new goalkeeper, so it becomes a very interesting situation. With the tumultuous situation at Leeds, would that be the right choice if Leeds stay up? Um, Possibly a move to like someone like Brentford, for example, um, or maybe Palace. Solid mid-table side that are looking to improve, but unless, let's say, Kasper Schmeichel decides to retire anytime soon, I can't see him going to Leicester. He's an out-and-out number one there, and there's no hint that he wants to retire or leave. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's limiting the options unless maybe Arsenal, you know, aren't necessarily sold on their position with their goalkeeping position. There have been some question marks over Arsenal's goalkeepers in recent seasons, but again, it's it's a difficult one unless he decides to look at going to Europe. Um, the Italian league, I think, would be the best league for him outside of England to test himself, and the goalkeeping standard in Italy is very high. So if he wants to keep his England space, and there's no options in the Premier League, um, Italy would be a good fit. Italy would be a very good fit. But there's got to be an Italian club that's willing to sign him, and he's obviously got to be willing to adjust to a different style of football where they're not overly keen on the sweeper keeper. Um, there's a lot of emphasis put on being commanding in the box. So it's not as simple as it looks. I think, yeah, Pickford's at a crossroads. But his form this season hasn't been great either. His form has not been great this season, so maybe a change of scene actually does him good. And I'm being honest, maybe a change of scene does actually do him and his career a world of good, working with a new goalkeeping coach, working with a new system, new defensive system, new club, working on those issues within his game. Um, but it's it is what it is. Um, but this does pose a problem for England. Having an unsettled number one, whose form has dipped, um, whose club are in danger of getting relegated, it does pose headaches. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens, but it's one of them. It's a difficult one. It really is, and that's why I think it's just one of them. It's a situation where his form has dropped. His club, their form has gone off a cliff, and there are other up and coming players who play the same position who are eligible to represent England, and we've got a World Cup at the end of the year. So yes, it's a very tricky balance, and I know Southgate obviously sees him as his number one, but his form is not what it is. So it's a sort of a post-tournament dip. But okay, so let's just talk about the Major League Baseball lockout quickly. The owners and players settled an international draft. Union now waiting for the full counter offer. So Major League Baseball on Wednesday evening announced the cancellation of more regular season games, pushing opening day to April the 14th. But on Thursday, so today, they were able to come to an agreement on the international draft and the qualifying offer. Major League Baseball now plans to make a full proposal covering all issues to the union. The sides this week took steps toward each other on the numbers in some issues, including the luxury tax thresholds and minimum salaries. Now, we talked about salaries earlier. Gaps still remain on key issues, but the most prominent hold-up on Wednesday was not directly numbers related. It was two issues Major League Baseball had tied together: the international draft, which the owners wanted newly instituted, and the players do not, and the qualifying offer, which players want to eliminate and owners do not. As noted in the tweet below, Major League Baseball has increased its offer in several areas in its latest counter proposal, giving the Players Association until literally now to respond. Yeah, so the Players Association has to respond about 4 minutes ago. Luxury tax thresholds 230 to 244 million over the course of a 5-year deal, increase of 2 million in the final year from last offer. Pre-arbitration pool 50 million, up from 40 million, and minimum salaries 700 to 780,000 per year. They're far below that right now for minimum salary. Deadline is now, by the way. Pre-arbitration, both amount and whether it grows annually. Minimum salary, luxury tax, and amateur draft bonus pool growth and structure. Now the international draft. So yeah, and that latest thing to come through came through just over an hour ago. So nothing else has been updated. Let's have a look. Okay, there are 38 votes in total, 30 team reps and 8 on the executive board. So right now, if the board is against, they need 2/3 of the player reps to vote for the proposal. That's 20 out of 38 votes need to go for it to pass. Player reps talk to their teams to determine their votes. And that was literally just come through. So we could see the end of the lockout. However, the season has been delayed to April 14th. So Major League Baseball, we could be seeing the end of a lockout. The talks may yet break down if players union votes against or doesn't meet the threshold, which is required to be 20. The talks collapse. So we'll see what happens with the Major League Baseball lockout, but the season is delayed by further couple of weeks. So we will come back to that later on. So that's interesting. So they're literally locked there. So it is coming. It is now. It is really coming down to the wire here. They are late in announcing how they voted. They were meant to have announced by now. So we will come back to that in due course. So Major League Baseball season delayed yet again, yet further. So more games are lost. This is becoming expensive. And the Fenway Sports Group, who own Liverpool, own the Boston Red Sox. So that is a very interesting subplot. I could look at the history of the Fenway Sports Group and their involvement in sport, and not only of their ownership of Liverpool, but the Red Sox and now the Pittsburgh Penguins were recently acquired as they're the majority stakeholders. Although Mario Lemieux, former player and former major stakeholder, is still a minority stakeholder within that organisation. Fenway Sports Group has its fingers in multiple sports and in many pies. So Interesting to note that obviously they own the Red Sox, and that kind of, what does that mean um, for Major League Baseball? Because they're the second biggest team in Major League Baseball for revenue and size and fan base. So um, very interesting to see what's happening there. And most people haven't paid attention to baseball till now. It takes a labour dispute for non-baseball fans to be interested in baseball, and it's not because of what's happening on the field; it's what's happening off the field that's making the headlines there. So s- spot on. Wow, that's really annoying. So that's interesting. So we may see an end to the lockout this evening. It may continue. So we'll have to see how the Players Association have voted as that comes in over the coming hour or so. Um, and if they vote against the proposals that have been put on the table by the league, the lockout continues. And we've seen the talks break down several times, and they've been quite heated and quite intense over the last couple of weeks. And the fact that the league has delayed the season again is not a good sign. I think it's to put pressure on the Players Association to come to the table, but it's not a good sign. So we shall keep our eyes peeled in regards to the Major League Baseball lockout, and if there is an end in sight. But if they vote against these proposals, I don't know where the league and the Players Association in baseball go from here. But I'm not a baseball fan, but it's striking. I've never done the amount of videos I've done on Major League Baseball in the last couple of months is the most ever on the channel, and if they come to a provisional agreement, they've still got to ratify it. They've still got to, you know, fine tune the collective bargaining agreement, um, and things can still happen until it's gone from provisional to set in stone. So even if they do provisionally agree to some of the proposals, there's still issues on the table. There's still problems, and it, I don't think it resolves a lot of the issues that are in play. There's no trust between the players and the owners. That's a fact, and it's the only major league in North America without a salary cap. So at some point in the future, that's got to change, um, because the luxury tax doesn't create a competitive league where everyone's got an equal footing. And it's part of the reason why the minimum salary is so much lower than the competitive their competitors in like the NBA, the NFL, and NHL for you know um, player talent in the sense of the athletic talent that is available. And while they make double the revenues of the NHL, their players earn 30% less. And even with raising the minimum salary, it's still below NHL levels. And I think that is going to come to a point where they're going to say the minimum salary's got to be above $1 million per year. And we'll see what happens in regards to the Major League Baseball lockout. As I say, um, we'll see what happens. Do I think the American Rugby League, will go ahead this year? That's a good one. I hope it does, because I think it will benefit the US going into the World Cup. I think again, various attempts have been made to get a professional league off the ground. And the same was in rugby union. It took several attempts before they were actually successful with Major League Rugby. So I'm tentatively optimistic, but the issue is there are a lot of obstacles in the way, and it needs. I think it does actually ironically, need support from the NRL and to a certain extent the Super League. But the Super League involvement in North America has been nothing short of disastrous with the Wolfpack and the Ottawa races. So in that regard, I think it will need support from the NRL in order for uh, growth to happen, and I think there's still issues within the NRL, within administration and governance, that for me makes me a bit nervous. Even though the NRL is the superior product to Super League, there are still issues within the governance side of the sport in Australia. While it's not as bad as the sport over here with governance issues in Europe, um, to me, there's still it's an imperfect governance system with the Australian Rugby League Commission and then the NRL as a subsidiary, in a sense, in the pecking order. But at least with the NRL, there is a sort of a very obvious chain of command from Peter V'landys at the top to Andrew Abdo to the club execs. But yeah, I hope, I do hope that they make progress. But with what happened with the Ottawa races relocating back to England, that poses a problem. And of course, with the collapse of the Toronto Wolfpack, that poses a problem. That domestically, no. Internationally, yes. Domestically, it's the AFL, but internationally, it's the NRL. So it's a weird one. So domestically, the AFL, the Aussie rules, the AFL is the dominant league domestically for domestic audience, because of its national imprint. Whereas in rugby league, it's mostly East Coast centric, and that is a problem. And while the NRL is expanding next year with Dolphins, they've still got less teams, and their traditional location, the AFL. So domestically, the AFL is more successful, but internationally, the NRO is a more recognised league in the sense that people know about it outside of Australia and New Zealand, whereas the AFL has started to get that international recognition, but no other countries play Aussie rules apart from Australia. Um, you need a cricket pitch basically to do it, so only those countries that have the infrastructure in place could play it. And so, yeah, domestically in Australia, it's sort of like the NFL in the US or the CFL in Canada, so American football. Um, it's dominant nationally because it's got um, professional teams in every state, apart from Tasmania, and it's got secondary leagues in every state and territory, including the Northern Territory and Tasmania, that provide talent to the AFL. Whereas the NRL, outside of Queensland, New South Wales, and to a certain extent Victoria, and very limited success outside Melbourne Storm in the state of Victoria for the state leagues, Western Australia, and that's it. South Australia, Northern Territory, and Tasmania, it's AFL cricket that are the dominant sports. So AFL, um, it's just not in their consciousness. The national sports are actually field hockey in India and Pakistan, not cricket, ironically. It's just not in sport and culture. And plus, the climate actually, ironically, doesn't suit. Um, the time of year, which is this time of year that you play Aussie rules, much like the winter sport, um, it doesn't suit because the monsoon. You wouldn't be able to play. The Indian climate and the Pakistani climate doesn't suit. Doesn't suit. The quality of the pitches isn't great, and it just does not suit what the sport is. If that makes sense. The climatic conditions, because you're running around like it's very physical. The heat it wouldn't be good quality basically. And you're going into a sports market that already is well established with the IPL and the field hockey, which is played at a pretty high level as well professionally in India. And the sporting fan base doesn't register with Indian and Pakistani and Bangladeshi sports fans. It's cricket, field hockey, and they are obsessed with European football. So you're already fighting a losing battle with 1.6 billion people, if you include those three countries together. Yes, they are. Field hockey at the Olympics and the Commonwealths is India and Pakistan have world class field hockey federations and teams, and they are some of the best players in the world. Because it's their national sports. They actually more people play field hockey in India and Pakistan than cricket. It just so happens cricket is a more popular international sport that's played at a higher level in other countries like South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, the West Indian nations, obviously the West Indies, you know, Ireland and England and Wales, which is the ECB. Other nations where field hockey isn't as popular play cricket professionally, whereas field hockey has a smaller impact globally than cricket. Cricket's like the third biggest international sport in the world for participation. I would like to go and watch, but I've got netball tickets instead because my family. Hey, you're watching like the second biggest international sporting event after the Olympics for global reach, as in for multiple sports. So obviously World Cups like football and rugby union and cricket obviously have a bigger TV audience, but for global reach for the various sports involved, and the nations going, it's the second biggest after the Olympics for nation participation. Um, you've got to bear that in mind. It is a global, more nations compete than at World Cups. So take the opportunity, but it doesn't matter if it's netball. We've got a world class netball program. So the Jamaicans, ironically, that's what the gold medal match is going to be. It'll be either Australia, New Zealand, us, and Jamaica will be playing off for the gold medal. Yes, Jamaica and Canada have a very good setup as well when it comes to netball. So there's your medalists there. There's your medalists. And your medal matches. I've just named them. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. The reach the Commonwealth Games has is about a third as much as the Olympics, basically. Field hockey is popular in the Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games, but also no India and Pakistan. There's professional leagues. Australia is pretty well participated in. New Zealand have a very good field hockey team as well, both men and women. They're very good, and ironically, some of the other European nations do as well. Um, it's just that when it comes to the media rights and TV rights, it's not the best game for TV. It's not the best team game for TV. And English fan, I'm surprised with the success we've had at the Commonwealths and the Olympics in the field hockey in both men and women historically, that it hasn't got a bigger following domestically, and there isn't a real solid. I mean, there is professionalism in it, but a better TV deal. But it's not a great sport for TV. I've watched it on TV. It's not as good as ice hockey, for example, which is a variant of hockey, obviously. Um, the pace of the game is slower. So when you're watching things like rugby league, rugby union to a certain extent, ice hockey, football when it's played at pace, they're much better TV spectacles than field hockey. There's more action, there's more collisions. Field hockey is meant to be a semi-contact sport because you're not really meant to actually make contact with your opponent. Um, all the other sports I've mentioned are contact sports where you can actually you can flatten your opponent as long as you gain possession legally. You can take your opponent out basically. So it's not as good as a television spectacle because it's a semi-contact sport. It's ridiculous. You've got non-contact, semi-contact, full contact sports. The reason is mainly because the UK is held better football and rugby to a lesser extent. Yes, you could argue that. It's the way the mainstream media is geared, and again, you've got to go back to 1992 with the advent of Sky Sports, and obviously that gave us the Premier League. So the old football league changed, the structure changed, and then it gave us professionalism in rugby union. Was the change in TV rights, and it changed how rugby league is played at the time of year. It's now a summer sport in this country, whereas it's still a winter sport in Australia and New Zealand. And I think reverting back to winter might actually help rugby league because playing in the height of summer does nothing for the game. I think it actually hinders the game because you're playing in warm temperatures and heat fatigue. There's a reason why the Aussies are better than us, and the quality gap is shot out is because they play in their winter when it's cooler. So the players are less physically drained when it comes to the end of year test. So when the World Cup is played, um, the Aussie and New Zealand based players and the Tongans, ironically, the physical exertion is less because they're playing in cooler temperatures for the most part. That's in northern Queensland. When you're playing in New South Wales and Canberra and Melbourne, especially in certain areas, it's like an autumn, maybe warm wind. Like today was about 13 degrees. That's beautiful conditions to play. Beautiful conditions to play rugby league in. Whereas we're playing in the height of summer when it's high 20s to mid 30s, and that's not nice conditions to play in a sport like rugby league with the pace of the game. And you can tell the game is slower pace, and the players just they're still obviously physically fit, but that affects how the game is played. Um, I think it's played better when it's played in winter. Early, autumn through till early spring. I think swapping it to a summer league a predominantly summer league was a massive mistake. I know it marries up then with the um, NRL where the seasons are parallel, but I think it should just be an all-round game. So if an Australian player wants to come over for a season, he can play the majority of the season and then go back and play the game. So it's a pain in the arse. Footballing is like Australia's or your rules or Ireland's GA. It's religion. Yeah, it is, but there are ways to. Not everyone's a football fan. Not everyone in Ireland's a Gaelic Amateur Association fan. Not everyone in Australia's an AFL fan. You will, as if you get the marketing right, you can have fans who are only obsessed with one sport, and you get the diehards who will not support anything else. As long as market nationally, but then you remember where your club is based, the city or the town it is based in, and you can get the local fan base solidly behind you. You can sell your product. But with indoor field hockey, we don't have indoor arenas that size. It's a handball court size, but we don't have handball courts, only hockey box. Yeah, there's a reason why certain sports just aren't well participated in various countries. It's to do with facilities, absolutely. Um, but I can't say a sport I'm saying. Well, it depends. I mean, look at what's happening with Major League Baseball. It's current. I'm actually going to check to see if the talks have progressed because we're waiting to see if the proposal's been accepted or rejected. Um, you've got the big four sports, and it's down to how you market the major leagues in North America and the markets you put teams in. So competing with the other sports, it's all about how you market the product. And let's see if there's any further loads. It's getting sweaty bum time, and I thought it's sweaty bum time. No, it's all about how you can market things. If you get your a good TV rights and media deal, and your online presence is, big up there, you can absolutely. Um, the lockout's over. Major League Baseball players have accepted the owner's proposal, and the start of spring training is imminent. Sources tell the Athletic. So that means over 20 reps from the Players Association have voted in favour of the proposals on the table. I think pushing back the start date of the league to the 14th of April is basically yesterday's forced the players' hand. That is literally just broken. Now that's a provisional agreement, but I think the reputational damage to Major League Baseball because of this lockout is. We'll have to see how the fans respond to the return to play. I've got a wonky mustache. So it looks like the work stoppage is about to end. So yeah, Um, I'll have to do a video on that tomorrow, but or later on. But it's provisional. It's we'll have to see if everyone's happy because that can then break down further. But that is a lot of progress made in a couple of days, considering they delayed the season further. So um, obviously the players were like, we're not getting paid here. Free agents have got no money. Depending if you've got a signing bonus or not, um, would would affect how if you're getting paid or not. So that is something we'll have to see what the details are. But it looks like the players have accepted the league's proposal and play will resume. It's just a question of when they decide to start spring training. Um, but we'll have to see how the fans respond and what the response is from baseball fans going forward because I still think there's a lot of issues within the game. And a lot of these issues could have been settled earlier. So we'll see if anyone in a position of administration, be it on the league side or the Players Association side, if there's a change in who Manfred as commissioner, for example, do the owners still have faith in him? I would think breaking the lockout and ending it, I think maybe that. We'll have to see. No sports will match football and rugby in England because no one is going to invest. Well, you'll be surprised when it comes to investment. I think ice hockey is the fastest growing sport in the UK, and a fair bit of investment has gone into ice rinks and indoor arenas in this country in that regard that can have ice hockey played. Um, I think it'd be a massive boost if the NHL was to play some more pre-season or regular season games over here at some point. And obviously, Liam Kirk getting drafted and some other players projected to go into the NHL draft in the coming years, I think helps with that. They are expensive, but if you've got the right investment behind it, they can pay off. But ice hockey is an expensive sport to play and watch. It is. Um, but there is a certain amount of investment there. There is. It's whether it's government money, be it local or national or private money that goes into building them and maintaining them and running them. And we've had that debate on this channel about facilities before. But football's in crisis. And if looking at Major League Baseball, I mean, yeah, if there was a similar situation with football players down tools, you never know. Any kind of issue within the game. I mean, look what's happening with Chelsea and Everton right now in the Premier League. I mean, that will have a knock-on impact. And fans are feeling pissed off, and fans have a proportion of fans have turned their backs on the game. It's just facts. This is not me making up. There are some people go, I was interested in football, but I don't watch it anymore. And the amount of lads I work with, I say, because you know, who do you support? You like sport? I always ask this question. And a lot of them say, I used to watch football, I don't watch it anymore. And that is striking. So I do believe there is a trend where less people are watching it less. There's a portion of people who've just gone, oh, I just can't afford Sky or I can't afford BT or I've just lost interest in the sport. And it's a thing. It's not um, just me making up. If you were to go down my workplace and ask them, who do you support? Oh, I used to follow, but I don't follow anymore. And that is a common answer I get at work. And it's normally from the younger lads. It normally is from the younger colleagues of mine who say, "Yeah, no, I just don't feel connected anymore." But yeah, so it would be nice to see the World Championship Ice Hockey hosted in the UK at some point. That would be nice. Maybe one day. Should we stay at the top division? Maybe one day. It's possible. Anyway, I'm going to call that a stream. Thank you very much for your questions. I really appreciate it. And obviously, the Major League Baseball thing is developing. It looks provisionally as if the Players Association and the league have come to terms, so the lockout could be over very, very shortly. But thank you very much. Of course, we'll keep up in tune with what's happening with Chelsea and Everton as well. well, because that will have an impact on the rest of the Premier League. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please place your thoughts in, obviously, ask the questions. And if you're watching this stream after it's gone out, place your thoughts in the comment section below if you're watching after I posted the stream on YouTube. Thank you very much, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.